Chapter 641. Pass the Bag. The next morning started with extreme excitement. The Kings did all need to get back home, but they didn't actually want to miss the tournament. They didn't get a chance to watch such things in person outside of the holidays, when they were surrounded by dignitaries who all wanted something, so they didn't actually get to watch much. But here, it was just their peers, a strange feeling for the ones who considered themselves the top of society. Do you think that we will see an unhorsing again today? It's such an uncommon thing these days, with all the advancements in equipment, that I didn't think that I would get to see one at all. But we did get one in the preliminaries. The King of West Kyria asked. I think that there will be another before the end of the tournament, but I don't know if we will be able to stay for it. It's unfortunate, but if we stay away any longer, the advisors will actually lock us in our offices when we get back. King Kyria laughed at the Necromancer King's assessment, but the old undead was not wrong. I regret putting the office on the 4th floor. He agreed. Dominic smiled, and the Necromancer King laughed at the expression. The Dragonkin is laughing at us because he has wings, so even if he jumps off the balcony, he's fine. King Kyria rolled his eyes. You can fly, I've seen you do it. That's why my office doesn't have a balcony. Too many of my advisors would use it as a second entrance. As this was hopefully the last full royal breakfast that she was going to have to make for a while, Beth had gone all out on the spread this morning, and had even sent someone to get imported fruit preserves from the various nations so that there was a touch of home added to the meal. Whether the Kings would notice or not was a different matter, but Dominic did notice that a few of them looked surprised to see certain things on the table that were not normally part of the signature Wistover breakfast, also known as Chef Beth's favorite dishes. But with that done, it was time for the trip to the arena and the formal drawing of the order. As this was the start of the official tournament, and everyone remaining had qualified, Dominic would join the knights on the grounds, and they would draw lots to determine what order they would joust in. It was considered to be the fairest way of doing things, and it added a bit more suspense for the crowd, as there were no guarantees that the matches would be between knights from different nations, or even different regions. Sometimes, the two local favorites would end up against each other in the first match. A disappointment for many, but a guarantee that no mishap would stop the favorites from facing each other. The knights were gathered outside when Dominic arrived, and followed him onto the grounds, so they could get in position and wait for the royals to arrive. None of them knew that the plan was to have the royals head out during the day. Not even their military commanders had been informed yet. The King of Signia was the first to enter, with the others immediately behind him, entering from the side of the building, where the royal guards had secured the entire path from the door to the seats. It was standard protocol, and in this case it made for a very impressive procession of dignitaries to start the event. Welcome, everyone, to the arena. Today marks the official start of the event, with the preliminary qualifications over and all of our jousters ready to impress with their martial prowess. As you all know, we have knights from all over the region here today, representing many nations and many more noble houses. Now, I know that none of you would call me an unfair lord, at least not right to my face, but in the interest of keeping things impartial, we will be assigning the order by random draw. This bag contains sets of tokens, each with a number on it. The knights will joust in order, paired against the opponent who has the same number as they do. As he was the last to joust in the preliminary round, Sir Mick will be the first to draw. Take your token and hold open the bag for the knight next to you. Then pass it along. The knights looked startled at that revelation. Normally, the host would have one of his adjutants move through the crowd with the bag, letting everyone pick. Letting them hold the bag for each other opened the door to all sorts of amusing foolishness, as well as chances to make sure that the bag wasn't rigged. Sir Mick reached into the bag and pulled out one of the tokens, a shining coin made of cartbright, with the number 12 inlaid into one side of it, and the heraldry of the Wistover Duchy on the other side. The coin alone would be valuable, given the material that it was made out of. But it also helped showcase the wealth of Wistover, both in materials and magic. Number 12. Sir Mick called, letting the crowd know what he pulled. Then he took the bag from Dominic and held it closed while he gave it a good shake. For luck. Go ahead now, he announced, loud enough for the crowd to hear him. Sir Martin, a knight of the Natural Sons and local to Wistover, reached into the bag and pulled out a token. Number 6. It is good luck, at least for Sir Mick, as he won't have to face me in the first round. Sir Martin held out the bag for the knight next to him, and the number 4 was pulled before the bag passed down the line. The show kept the crowd entertained, but Dominic knew that most of them had already forgotten all but a few of the numbers. After all, the number that they really wanted hadn't come out yet. Chapter 642, Eliminations. That moment that they had all been waiting for came 2/3 of the way down the line. First joust goes to me, Sir Korath of the Mitfield Royal Order announced. The crowd stood to cheer for the first man up, drowning out everything as Korath shook the bag and held it out for the man next to him. Prince Damien of Mitfield reached into the bag and pulled a shining token, then patted his knight on the shoulder. I'm afraid we won't meet in this round. I am number 40. He passed the bag along to the other Royal Order knights, and then the bag moved to Sir Charles of Signia City.
Number 1.
The first victory of the day will be mine. A Signian jousting champion versus a knight of the Mitfield Royal Order was going to be a difficult match for anyone else to follow. Both of the men were paramount experts in the field, trained since birth, with years of experience. Many more years, in the case of Sir Charles, who was already past his 40th birthday. The bag continued to pass down the line with undiminished enthusiasm. This was only the first round, and there would still be 42 knights after the first match. With the order settled, the knights cleared the field, while Sir Korath and Sir Charles went to mount up. In the past, the process of getting mounted and settled was a slow one, requiring at least one assistant, or a step stool for the knights to get into the saddle. However, with the advent of Magitech bringing physical enhancements to everyone with a military background, the process became part of the show. The knights put one foot in the stirrup and gracefully tossed themselves into position so that their squires could do the final check of saddles and stirrups, ensuring that everything was in good condition and properly adjusted. Mechanical horses didn't need to breathe and didn't act up while being equipped, but that didn't mean that gear didn't stretch or wear with use. So even between passes, it was critical to thoroughly check every bit of the tack. Once both horses were checked and the knights happy with their positioning, the lances were handed over by the squires and the opponents moved into position at the ends of the arena. Dominic noticed that both of them were wearing safety glasses under their helmets today, the magical sapphire lens spectacles that the local mage sects were producing. So, instead of looking away to protect their eyes, both kept their focus locked on their opponent right until impact, and both lances shattered with an impact that rocked both men back in their saddles. They saluted the royals and Dominic as they passed, but it was clear that both were rushing back to get another lance, eager to prove that they were not inferior to the other. One was a royal-chosen young knight, son of a duke with an inheritance waiting for him. The other was the son of a landless knight, a 20-year veteran of the circuit and professional juicer. A generational battle, of sorts. Again the two charged, making their second of 5 passes down the course. Again, the lances exploded, an even pairing between two professionals. It was clear that Sir Korath had been underestimated. While he did have a large fandom, as the handsome son of a duke, he was not considered one of the top few contestants to win the tournament the way that Sir Charles was. The third pass ended the same, and the tension in the arena was at an all-time high. If there was no victor after 5 passes, it would be called a draw, and they would go again in an hour. Enough time for them to rest and strategize. The match looked like it was going to be a perfect draw as the lances tilted for the 4th time, but at the very last second, Sir Charles shifted his body, thrusting his lance forward with as much force as he could muster, while also shifting the angle of his shield. Sir Korath's lance slid off the angled shield and behind the other knight, while Sir Charles hit him square in the chest plate, exploding the lance and knocking him flat against his horse. For a second, Korath was stunned, looking at the sky and wondering what went wrong. Then, he recovered, grabbing the pommel of his saddle and getting himself back upright as the mechanical steed came to a stop. His right hand was empty, lance dropped in the commotion. But he knew already that it would be intact when the referee retrieved it. After taking a few seconds to recover, he waved at the crowd, who cheered for his recovery, then rode back to his end of the lane to get the final lance. He had a minute or two before anyone would start to worry about him. A hard hit always took a bit to recover from. Fortunately, There was a Larry troll from the Sand sect on hand, ready to offer healing or potions if necessary. Sir Karroth shook his head and opened his visor to down a healing potion of his own, and then latched it back shut and had his squire adjust his shield before checking his saddle. "Good to go, sire." Karroth took another lance and focused down the arena at Sir Charles, who was sitting perfectly still, tall and proud in his saddle. The man was the epitome of a tournament knight, not just in skill, but in showmanship. He didn't gloat, didn't return to his end of the lane before Sir Karroth had recovered. It was all about the show to him. But Karroth was only down by one lance, and this final tilt could even everything up and send them to a drawing match later in the day. With a raised lance salute, the pair indicated readiness, and then began down the arena for the final time. As the lances met, Karroth shifted his shield to the center of his body, trying to drag the lance too far toward the edge of the shield and cause a glancing hit. But just as his lance crashed into the center of Sir Charles's shield, the other man drew his arm back, buying a fraction of a second to adjust, and the second lance landed solidly against Karroth's shield, shattering and giving the first victory of the day to the Signian. Victor, Sir Charles Whitberry of Signia City, has won the first match. The referee declared as the two knights stopped across from each other. "Excellent lance work." Karroth congratulated the older man. "And fine horsemanship. I thought for sure you were going to take a tumble today. That chest hit was a rough one." Karroth nodded, and the two went their separate ways. Him to his tent to check his equipment before returning to watch the matches, and Sir Charles to make a pass for the crowd before exiting the stadium, finished for the morning, but advancing to the second round. Chapter 643, Grudge Match. With that first loss, it was the perfect excuse for the King of Mitfield to excuse himself. His knight, and a member of the Royal Paladins, had lost the first match, and it was only natural that he would go to comfort him in some way. They would naturally know each other, as he was the son of a duke and a knight of the order, who was working to protect one of the princes. So, the king stepped out, surrounded by his guards, with a mage as an escort, and nobody batted an eye. They were too excited about the second match. Unlike the first, the second and third matches of the day turned into a lopsided pairing, with one of the knights in the second match having his lance knocked down during the final approach, scoring a single point. With a failure to break a lance during the first attempt as well, that left him down 10 points to 3. Not a good spot to be in. When the third pass also didn't break a lance, putting him at 15 points to 6, the knight gracefully withdrew, deciding that it was better to save some dignity than to hope to unhorse his opponent for the come-from-behind win in the first round. This simply wasn't his day. After a few minutes, the mage who had escorted King Mitfield out returned and nodded to Dominic that the job was done. The king was back in his castle, and they were one step closer to having all the chaos sorted out in Westover. As the morning continued, the matches moved between near draws and brutal mismatches, with a handful of standout contenders. Lars, of the Mitfield Royal Order, managed to break 5 straight lances to overcome his opponent by a single point, while Abe, the hometown potato, took a resounding victory with 4 lances to 1 before his opponent yielded. That brought them to Sir Nalin of Sherstonia. He was facing Sir Nick of the Mitfield Royal Order, and the two larger-than-life personalities of the wealthy knights were enough to have the crowd in a frenzy. Both had entered with much fanfare, strutting around the arena to egg on their fans before settling into position. Not that it was entirely uncalled for. They were both strong contenders for the win, but it was still the first round, and most of the other knights had been much more reserved, certain that doing so would only invite disaster and mockery should their match not turn out the way that they expected. However, with both of them doing it, the crowd was certain this was going to be an epic battle. The flag dropped on their match, and both knights thundered toward each other, the usual routine for the day. Then, Sir Nalin's horse suddenly faltered, as if spooked. Something that wasn't possible for a mechanical horse unless it was specifically directed to. The move caused the timing on Sir Nick's strike to be off, and his lance drifted right past Sir Nalin, hitting him with the side, and not the tip. That was considered the barricade, worth 0 points, while Sir Nalin's lance broke cleanly against Nick's shield. The two men circled back and paused to glare at each other before returning to their spots. It was clearly a cheap trick, mimicking the behavior of a real horse to make a greasy trick look like an accident. Most of the crowd wouldn't catch it, but all the other knights would. Not that it would buy Sir Nick any sympathy from them. It was a cheap trick, but exceptionally difficult to master. And between knights, it was skill that impressed their peers the most. The next pass, Dominic could see the anger in Nick's stance, rigid and tilted further forward than usual, a hunting stance instead of a calculating preparation stance. The two combatants collided with the sound of splintering wood as both lances shattered, while the knights were rocked sideways in their saddles. It was far and away the hardest hit that anyone had seen so far in the tournament. The two passed again, this time with a bit more respect in their posture. Dominic briefly wondered if Sir Nalin had a grudge against the upper nobility. They weren't from the same country, so even if they had met on the circuit before, it would be unlikely for it to be personal. At most, it might be a recent grievance over something that was said this week. The third pass began under the overwhelming cheering of the crowd, drowning out everything else. Not even the hoofbeats of the horses could be heard, nor the clanking of armor, which was normally the defining sound in the tense silence before impact. Both lances snapped, allowing Sir Nalin to keep his advantage. Again they met, and for a fourth time, they collided. It looked like Sir Nalin was satisfied to keep breaking lances. As long as he landed a hit on the fifth pass, he would have the victory. For the final time, the two knights charged, leveling their lances. Then, Sir Nick lifted his lance at the last second, aiming at Sir Nalin's head, not his shield. The other knight didn't flinch, didn't even look away. Two lances shattered, and Sir Nalin was knocked flat against his horse, laying limp in the saddle as his shield and lance fell from his hands. The horse stopped at the end of the lane, and the crowd waited in breathless silence to see if the knight would recover or slide out of his saddle. Tying yourself to the horse was against the rules, and if you tilted off the side while unconscious, you would certainly touch the ground, counting as dismounted. 5 seconds passed, 6, 7. Then Sir Nalin's hand raised before reaching forward to grab the pommel and pull himself upright. After a 5-pass course, the winner on points is Sir Nalin of Shersdonia. The judge announced, and the already excited crowd roared in appreciation, while the knight in question blearily raised one hand in recognition. Or perhaps just in hopes that the cheering was for him, as he was not at all steady in the saddle as he rode back to the exit where the healers were waiting. Chapter 644, Silent Extraction. With that distraction, the majority of the other royals signaled for extraction. The joust would be delayed for a few minutes, as the crowd was incredibly invested in knowing the status of Sir Nalin, who they hoped would be well enough to compete in the second round and wouldn't have to withdraw after the head injury. In the normal course of events, that was what would happen. Such a blow was not fast to recover from, and even with most healing magic, a concussion would still leave the brain in a vulnerable state for a few days. Technically, it was healed, but the freshly healed areas were delicate, so the general consensus was that no violent or rigorous activity should be undertaken for a week. Good advice, but devastating during a tournament. After a potion and a full round of healing, a runner was sent to the judge who read the proclamation out loud for the crowd, using magic to make himself heard. From the healing team of Westover Arena. Sir Nalin of Shersdonia has suffered a concussion, which has been promptly treated. However, his condition is considered to be unstable and his continued participation in the event shall be at the knight's own discretion at the time of his next match. That wasn't what they were hoping for, but it was better than a flat declaration that he would be eliminated. If more than one knight had to withdraw, the matches would be rearranged, and that was expected. However, an odd number of knights due to withdrawals would give someone a bye to move to the next round uncontested. That was not what the crowd was hoping for. Sure, they realized that the knights were risking severe injury on the field, but they still wanted to see the most intense matches possible. And the next matches didn't disappoint. The knights were not willing to lose in front of royalty, even if the kings were no longer visibly present in the arena. The natural assumption was that they were somewhere nearby, and at worst they would hear the gossip about the best matches by the end of the day. Even without them, there were still 2 crown princes here. Future kings, should nothing go wrong with their succession. By dinner time, the only king left in Westover was the king of Signia, though Dominic noticed that there was an odd brooch on the chest of the Shersdonian envoy. It was definitely a techno-witch's invention, but Dominic couldn't tell what it was intended to do. Going by the positioning, it was most likely a recording device so that the matches could be reviewed by Tryon and the Necromancer King. That would let them pretend that they were here to the end. However, the king didn't look like he was planning to leave anytime soon. The Signian royal booth had just ordered meat pies and more wine, and Prince Claudius was doing his best to use his gaze alone to eviscerate every knight who looked too long at Eleanor. It couldn't be helped. She was seated next to the king, so they would naturally be looking in her direction, but that didn't matter to his overprotective brother instincts. All he knew is that there were single noblemen looking in the general direction of his little sister, and he was having none of it. You know, you should likely go distract your brother before he explodes. He looks a bit like a pressure cooker right now. Dominic whispered to Alexis between matches.
He will be fine.
He needs to learn to get over it. Besides, how is she going to find a good military husband if she doesn't attend the justs and other events where they congregate? Surely she's not going to find what she's looking for among the pampered nobles of the royal court. Alexis whispered back. You did, and your sister did as well. Alexis laughed loudly enough that it caught the attention of the spectators behind them. I don't think that Josephine counts. She didn't go looking for a knight. She went looking for a punching bag, and Thorvald was the only one brave enough to take the position. Even if she had ended up marrying Duke Saldoc, I doubt that his heart would have held up for the year, she declared. Dominic smiled. I wonder how those two are doing? We really should have asked before the king left. I'm sure that it's going well enough. I haven't received any messages from her that would indicate otherwise. She's settled right into the Duke's manor outside of Northinta, and apparently she's managed to convince Thorvald to let her create a new paladin order in Northia, as the region didn't have one, and the Kyrian knights aren't paladins. In a way, she might actually be doing better as a duchess than I am. I get maids and daves, but she gets her own paladin order. That made the nearby guests laugh quietly. Only the twins would see that as a selling point. But the bit about her getting maids and daves as the high points of her time as Duchess really did highlight just how unconventional the situation in Westover was. Even though most of them had only been here for a few weeks or months, they had gotten used to seeing the trolls of all sorts wandering through town. There wasn't anywhere else that they could think of that non-humans were so common. And that wasn't even counting that a good third of the town had animal ears, horns, tails, or some other mark of a sorcerer or beastkin. Plus, some of the trolls were rather cute in the way that a pug was so ugly they were adorable. The crowd got louder as the day wore on, and everyone got a bit more drunk. By mid-afternoon, Dominic wasn't sure who was going to need a good night of rest more. The knights who had taken injuries during the joust, or the crowd who had been watching them. Either way, there were going to be a lot of sore heads and bodies by morning. Chapter 645. Family Dinners. Dinner that evening was in a much more relaxed mood than it had been in what felt like forever. No more debutantes and their suitors, no influx of nobles and royals, just family. The fact that the family dinner included the King of Signia almost felt like it was normal and anticlimactic, when Dominic knew for certain that even most of the dukes would rarely host the king more than once every 3 or 4 years. He simply didn't have time to personally tour the nation himself. He sent his sons to that part of the role of maintaining order and loyalty to the royal family. With his age advancing and Prince Claudius getting closer to taking over the throne, it made perfect sense to send him instead. He needed to have the loyalty of the nobles and wealthy families when he ascended, or Signia would be sent into turmoil with a number of people who would silently try to undermine stability to get a bit more for themselves. So, Father, how do you like what we've done with the place? You should have seen it when we first arrived. Nothing like it is now. The king smiled. You forget that I was here before it was abandoned. I can imagine what it looked like when you arrived, going by the military reports. Right. I forget that this place was somewhat famous before it was ours. The king laughed. I wouldn't call it that. It was a good meeting place when you needed to talk discreetly to the Dragon King, though. The Earl was happy to arrange meetings, even if it was just through the viewing mirror in the basement. I don't see that there anymore, so perhaps it was damaged or deliberately destroyed to prevent it falling into others' hands. Dominic thought about what was in the storage item in the basement. There was nothing that would be called a viewing mirror. There wasn't anything of the sort on the bodies either. So either it was destroyed, still hidden, or it was somewhere else in the house, and he hadn't realized that it was magical. Prince Axel smiled at his sister. If you want a new one, I can make it for you. Perhaps I should have it connected directly to our dearest Claudius, so he can talk to his favorite sister anytime. Claudius looked secretly excited for that. Alexis smiled at her fellow book lover. Actually, that's not a bad idea. I know you meant it as a joke, but sending these messages by magical tablets or messengers is a real pain. If I could just talk to him through a linked mirror, it would be much easier once father retires and passes the throne down. The king looked wounded. Yet, you didn't ask for one to me? You have how many children older than I am? If we all kept requesting your presence for in-person meetings, you would never get anything done. Alexis joked. The king sighed. You're not wrong about that. But I can't really complain, since it's a self-inflicted issue. Alexis nodded. I will keep it in mind in the future. 3 or 4 heirs to Westover should be more than enough. Dominic nodded in agreement. One wasn't much security, plus he would definitely want to keep on a younger sibling for them. He always did think that it would be fun to have a little sister. Though, if he would have turned out like Claudius, perhaps it wasn't worth the stress. Alex did seem to be fairly well adjusted about the whole situation, though. So, it might not be an inherent issue with sisters and simply a Claudius peculiarity. If nobody requires my presence in the throne room, I will be remaining here for a few more days, hopefully enough to see the tournament through to the end. It will be good for morale, both for the newly elevated nobles and for the people of Westover to see that their king does care enough to stay and see them, to interact with the common people and such. Alexis smiled at her father. This about Beth's cooking, isn't it? I will admit that we have missed having her around the castle. Her successor is quite skilled, but it's not quite the same. In the kitchen, Beth smiled fondly toward the dining room. Her successor was her younger cousin, and they'd been working together for nearly 15 years in the royal kitchens, after the girl was widowed young and chose to take a palace position instead of remarrying. Her husband, like so many others, had pooled money with his family, and the matriarch had assigned money to each family in what only the woman herself could claim was an impartial manner. But after the accident, Beth's cousin had been a widowed daughter-in-law, and the matriarch didn't see any need for her to remain in a whole house all alone. That could be assigned to another young member of the family, and Beth could move into one of the spare rooms in the main house. Technically, she would have been more than a servant, but the duties of a widow and a senior servant in the family were mostly semantics, with the widow having more authority. If she had actually gotten along with the family, that would have been fine. An easier life than most housewives got. But she did not. So, she left, and now she was considered one of the finest pâtissiers in the entire kingdom. One of the best. But according to the king, that title still went to Chef Beth. While I do feel a tiny bit bad about stealing away Miss Beth, we are glad to have her here in the duchy, and you are welcome to visit as often as needed to get your fill of her cooking. Dominic offered. The king laughed. Well, with the transportation array that has been built at the Duskblade Sex Academy, that might be possible. It is powerful enough that even the average court mage can reach from Signia City to Westover. Average for a court mage meant a master mage, bordering on an archmage, somewhere between level 20 and 25 with the portal spell memorized. The Duskblade sect also had a number of mages in that range, and a few, like Amy, who were simply extremely adept with the portal spell. So, he could also get home without bringing a powerful advisor. Chapter 646. Working at the show. The next morning, the crowd at the arena was absolutely insane. It was the weekend now, and anyone who didn't work retail or have urgent business had taken the day off to come watch. Dominic even saw Meade and the store clerk from Pop's Forge in the crowd, which meant the dwarf was likely enjoying the relative silence of being alone in the forge. Most of the prominent business people of Westover were here, as well as many of the barons and knights who had only just moved into their new homes. One day away from home wouldn't hurt anything, and half their residents were here in town anyhow. Jack Merlot smiled as he saw what Dominic was noticing. You should see the chaos at the farmer's market. Nobody can decide if they want to do their shopping first and then somehow load their bags under their seats, or if they should shop after and risk all the good stuff being sold out. The only saving grace is that the Merchants Guild is on the way from the market to the arena, and they're willing to hold parcels for a copper coin during the tournament. It's an easy few hundred coppers for the warehouse workers who couldn't get out of their shift today, and it's going to let the market sell out fast. The advisor explained. So, the crowd around the stadium is going to grow as the day goes on. It looks like we didn't make it large enough. Jack laughed. No, it's large enough. There is a standing area up in the nosebleed section, you see? If they want to pack that, we can get the entire population of the region in here, but half of the ones up top won't actually be able to see anything. However, the Adventurers Guild has a bard watching the justs, and he's doing narration through a Magitech speaker for those outside. They can hear what is going on, and with him narrating, they get a good idea, without being inside themselves. It's like a radio broadcast of the event, but just for the vendor area. Oh, that is a great service. It looks like we're in for quite the show today. Now that everyone had made it through one round, the arrangement was easy. The winner of the first match went against the winner of the last match, the second against the second last, and so on. As the first round was randomized, this gave them a much more unpredictable set of matches than it would if yesterday's matches had been arranged in any sort of logical order. It also let the knights who had to wait the longest yesterday go early today, while those from the middle of the day would go last. However, with the half number of matches, it would be close to the same time today. And then there would be another round later in the day. With the reducing number of contestants, they didn't plan to shorten the days. Instead, they would have the knights joust more than once. Then tomorrow, there would be a few hours between morning and afternoon rounds to encourage everyone to go out to the market. It would be good for the local economy and give everyone a reason to socialize and get to know their neighbors. Unfortunately for Dominic, being in attendance at the tournament didn't give him a day off from work. It just moved the work outdoors, as every few minutes he was presented with a new report from the advisors. Most of it was short blurbs of information. Daily updates, the income and spending reports, documents for him to sign to authorize the transfer of wages. Dominic already knew what most of these were supposed to say, and there were very few surprises. The only real surprise came from the airship factory. Not only had they sold their second airship, King Witheaton of Axbridge had prepaid for the third one off the assembly line, with a number of extra safety and security features. The most interesting one that Dominic could see in the list was a bloodline detector. How he planned to use it was a mystery, unless he was hiring staff who were all related or under the command of someone in a specific family. But he had paid the airship docks to have it commissioned and added to the airship's internal design. That was a huge chunk of cash for the duchy's coffers. The fact that they were not charging any sort of taxes at the moment was very limiting for their budget, but with sales numbers like this, they were not going to run short on money. Dominic had expected the number of Magitech fireplaces to fall off after the initial rush of people who were waiting for one to come available, but it didn't appear that they were. The Merchants Guild was simply finding more and more destinations to send them to. If they started shipping them into the southeastern nations, the demand would be insatiable, with over 200 million residents between 15 nations. They made a lot of fireplaces and lanterns, but not nearly enough to cover that. Especially when the southern nations were much colder than the northeastern nations. It was much more common for them to see snow during the cold season, though most of the population was coastal, so the snow wasn't as bad as it was inland in the hills. Dominic took a break from the paperwork to watch the match in front of him and saw that Prince Damien was entering the arena for his joust. The opponent had a Signian banner, but Dominic didn't recognize it, so he wasn't one of the Wistover knights. Someone from the capital, then. The king and the other royals seemed to know who it was, and the crowd was just excited to see the prince up again. The novelty of royalty on the jousting field would never get old with them, especially when everyone was willing to be a good sport about it and not withdraw under the excuse of avoiding injury to the royal family. Jousting might be much safer than it had been, with so many potions and Magitech devices with healing abilities. But if you took a bad fall and broke your neck, the chances that someone could resurrect you were very slim. Healing was magic, not a miracle. Unless you had a high-level priest, that was. In which case, the healing was literally a miracle, in that it was holy magic. And for that reason, Even seeing a royal dare to enter a joust was a rare thing. That sort of high-risk behavior was not normally condoned. Chapter 647. Poor Attempt. Prince Damien and the Signian knight lowered their lances, and Dominic could already see how this joust was going to go. The Signian knight's lance bounced a bit too much with the stride of his horse, while the prince's lance tip hovered perfectly level in the air, compensated by his body movement and subtle adjustments of his arm. However, when the lances landed, both were a clean break, an even start to the match. The jousters returned to their spots, and again they charged. This time was not an even match, though. Prince Damien shifted in his saddle as the lance approached, and the Signian knight managed to miss entirely, instead of hitting the shield on the close side. Just a slight wobble of the lance was all that it took, and suddenly he was down by 5 points. The next pass was marginally better, as he did manage to land a hit, but his lance did not break. It slid harmlessly off of the prince's shield. As the pair returned to their spots, the Signian knight raised his lance in a salute and started down the tilt, the formal withdrawal. Dominic couldn't blame him. Prince Damien was far technically superior, and there was little chance that he would make up the points in the last 2 passes. That miss was too big of a difference. The morning reports were slowly finished, just in time for the first round of jousts to come to a close with a brief announcement from the referee. With every contestant finished the first elimination round, we will now break for 30 minutes to prepare the concourse for the second round. Please relax and enjoy a refreshment while you wait. The maintenance of the field involved Dave pushing a wide roller over the grass, while casting nature magic to help it take root again. Going in the direction of the horses allowed him to press most of the churned earth back to a flat and stable state again, and the magic would stabilize it as good as new. Unlike most arenas, where the field would get progressively worse and more dangerous as the days wore on, the trolls were able to keep it as good as new. How about some more of that good wine? The old man is gone now, and we've run out. The king requested, his tone much more pleading than Dominic had expected of the dignified man. Father. Prince Claudius warned. Oh, calm down. I'm not that drunk. Now, about that wine. Dominic laughed, as he knew that the old man was putting on a show for someone. So, he filled the pitcher that the king had been drinking from and motioned for Amy to find the threat. Ironically, it was one of the simplest gestures in the hand language and one of the most used. So commonly used, in fact, that many people mistook it for an internal greeting between merchant guild members. More food was brought, light snacks now, so that they didn't feel groggy during the afternoon events. And that was when Dominic finally found the source of the issue. The servant who brought the food was not one of the veiled maids. She was wearing the uniform, but she walked wrong, and she didn't hold herself in the strict posture that Alexis demanded. She held herself with a slightly slouched, head-down posture of a proper and humble servant before the king. It was a subtle difference, just a tilt of the head. But it was enough that everyone in the royal family booth could tell that this was an imposter. When you go back, have someone send for Miss Amy, would you? Dominic informed her. Of course, Your Grace. I will send for her directly. That would make life easier on the little mage. Nothing said ambush, quite like sending a false servant directly to one of the mage sect assassins. Even if nobody outside the inner circle realized that was what she was. She didn't dress like one of the Duskblade sect members, and she looked quite young. So, everyone assumed that she was an errand girl or Dominic's assistant. Only those in the security forces knew better, and they were wise enough to keep quiet about the military capabilities of the Duke's Shadow. The same way that they didn't mention that the veiled maids were incredibly deadly. You know, we're not going to get any more snacks, right? Prince Alex sighed as he stared longingly at the plate. On the contrary, you might not get any more snacks, but I've got plenty. You can't be serious. Someone sent her, and if we totally ignore the plate, it will be suspicious. Just grab something from the vendors when they come by, and I will pretend that I am sharing these with my wife. I am reasonably certain that she'll cure me if they're poison, and most toxins barely affect me anyhow. Some are actually quite tasty. And not just the dragonberries. Dominic topped off all the wine pitchers in their box seats and picked up one of the sandwiches. The scent of poison hit his nose hard, and he flinched. Okay, they're not even trying. I can smell the poison from here, he announced, a bit louder than intended. The king began to laugh, but Alexis and Alex had their eyes trained on the crowd, intensely scanning for odd behavior after Dominic openly rejected the poisoned food. There, on the far side of the arena, facing their box, 3 men in nearly identical peasant outfits, artfully patched in the exact same spots, finished their drinks and rose, vanishing into the crowd. But not for long. The royal guards had tagged them already, and the mage sect likely had as well. With both of those groups on them, unless they immediately left by portal, they would not get far. You know what the worst part of this is? It's not just 1 or 2. They dosed every single thing on this plate. What a waste. Now he needed to order lunch again. Chapter 648, New Foods. 10 minutes after they sent the fake servant away, Amy was back with a cart full of sausage rolls and fried pierogies, a dish that Dominic had no idea anyone in the city actually made. He'd certainly eaten them before, but they were not local to Signia or to Wavemates. They came from further south down the continent. Found a new vendor? He asked. The Larry trolls from the Sand sect are selling them. The sausage is vegetarian, but I'm told that it's delightfully spicy. Amy replied, but her hands relayed a different message. I got the fake servant. She's in sect custody. The 3 observers managed to take a suicide pill before we could take them into custody. The bodies are being examined now. That wasn't ideal, but it was better than nothing. The trolls were right. The sausage rolls might not have any meat in them, but they were made with some sort of tofu and spice blend that vaguely mimicked a proper sausage, and they were just the right level of spicy. They use mashed potatoes and flour to get that consistency. Prince Russell whispered, "You are an expert in trollish cooking?" Dominic asked, surprised. Not exactly. One of my mentors suffered from the tick disease. It makes you allergic to meat, a truly horrific fate. Potions will fade it over time, but over the course of that summer I learned far more about cooking without meat than I knew was possible until I met the trolls here. There is a whole world of cooking out there that none of us ever try. But we really should call it a local culinary tradition, bringing in foods from all over the world to Westover. I think that it would draw a lot of business to restaurants when we get caravans and airships through. The prince suggested. Dominic had forgotten that Prince Russell had also been assigned to Westover by the king. He worked with Alexis, so Dominic didn't talk business with him on a daily basis the way that he did with his own advisors, so he had managed to overlook the fact that one prince was actually assigned here to deal with the foreign diplomats and the Alliance Bank issues. Which reminded him, when will your family be arriving? If you're to be assigned here for some time, you might as well get them settled into Westover. Dominic asked. Traditionally, we would wait for the dry season, where travel is less treacherous, but I suppose that I could call them by airship now. It's just the 2, and the little one is unlikely to be much trouble on a long trip before they can walk. After the tournament, we can arrange for them to be brought to us. There's no need for you to suffer alone. You can do it at work and at home. Alexis smacked him on the back of the head. Behave, and don't call married life suffering. See, I love her to bits, but my wife beats me when she's angry. Dominic complained. The 3 princes chuckled quietly at Dominic's false outrage. I will accept your assistance, Duke Dominic. It will be good to have the whole family back together again. Unlike my eldest brother, who may have forgotten what his wife looks like after so many years of duty, I am quite fond of mine. Alexis rolled her eyes at the childish men around her. Russell did have a point, though. If it were not for the children, it would be exceedingly difficult to prove that Prince Claudius even knew what his wife looked like. He spent so much time away from home-building relationships and alliances in preparation to take over as king that it had overwhelmed everything else in his life. Trumpets blared to announce that the joust was about to resume, and the crowd surged with people trying to get back to their seats. There was little faith in their fellows that anyone would save their seats if they arrived after the joust had started. So little, in fact, that most families had left one person to guard their spots. The arena didn't sell tickets and the seats weren't numbered, so where you sat was where you sat. And that was subject to change if someone else was sitting there after the break. There were also some who had watched all they planned to, and they were heading to the vendors for the afternoon before heading home. Staying in town would be impractical, either because they didn't bring camping gear, or because they simply couldn't be away from work that long. For the farmers, there were animals to feed first thing in the morning, and that was not optional. Even if they wanted to be away for a few days, they would have to either leave someone behind as they did for market trips, or ask the neighbors to feed the animals for them. Without the generational bonds that most farm communities had, that was something that most were reluctant to do. "Who is up first?" Dominic asked, as two knights staged themselves outside the gate, chatting amiably. "Potato and one of the Mitfield knights. I believe that they went to school together." Alexis whispered back. That would explain the casual camaraderie despite the fact that it was an elimination match. "Everyone to your seats. Our gallant knights are about to return to the field," the judge announced. That did nothing to calm the crowd. But it did get the stragglers moving, often precariously balancing a flagon of ale in either hand. The two knights lined up, and with the drop of the flag, they charged. Wood flew, and both knights made the turn, coming back to their spots as the runners picked up the broken lance tips. Then again and again. Four passes in a row. Both contestants broke lances, and the crowd was on their feet for the local hero. Perhaps it was a dubious tale of heroism, but he was a decorated war veteran, and he had managed to marry his childhood sweetheart. That was more than enough for the crowd, especially when the bards had been embellishing the details. Then, the fifth and final pass. Both lances hit, and the Mitfield knight was knocked flat against his horse, losing his grip. But Potato's lance did not break. It vibrated right out of his hand and fell to the field intact, while the opposing knight slowly pulled himself back upright with half a lance still clutched in his hand. "We have our victor, Sir Morgan of Wallace," the judge announced, while the crowd cheered and shouted consolations to Potato on a hard-fought defeat. Chapter 649. Sir Charles the Showman. With 2 rounds of eliminations finished, the afternoon crowd in the arena had exceedingly high hopes for the next matches. Their pool of contestants had been whittled down to a mere 24 knights now, only 12 matches. Unless someone was injured and there was a delay, that would be over and finished in time to get home for dinner. Perfect for the farmers who were contemplating whether to leave early. Dominic sat with Alexis, her family, and the advisors in the royal booth as if nothing strange had happened today, and nobody had tried to poison them. He had the reports already, and the mages were interrogating the one prisoner they had captured. Unfortunately, it seemed that she was just a hired patsy from Dago's who held a grudge for the loss of her husband in combat. They had told her just enough to get the job done and provided the poison, but forgot to tell her it was supposed to be diluted and spritzed in the food. The amount she had used was 20 times too much. Curiously, the toxin was one that didn't specifically target mages or paladins. It didn't restrict the use of magical items as many specialty poisons did, and was intended to be used to cause a natural-looking death or sudden illness. Done properly, survivors might not even know they had been poisoned. But that was not the sort of toxin that would normally have been appropriate for an attempt like this one. Dominic read the report as the knights worked their way through the matches. The knight who had eliminated Potato was eliminated in turn by Prince Damien, due to the nature of their joust order. And now they were starting to see the true power of the elite knights. Most had held back in the early rounds to avoid giving away any tricks and countermeasures they had been practicing. The knights who made their livings and reputations in the tournaments often fought against each other for the final few spots. So for the top tier of the regular circuit, adapting to the tactics of your rivals was a full-time job. You did it, or you were eliminated from the rankings. And then for the first time in the tournament, they came to a perfect draw between a knight from West Kyria and Sir Karath of Mitfield. The match will be held for 2 courses, to be the last tilt of the day. The format will be sudden elimination. The first to win a round will be the victor, the referee announced. The practice had originally been for the horses, but after 5 solid hits, it didn't matter how good your armor was. The knights needed a break. The next up was one of the favorites to win, Sir Charles Whitberry, who was developing quite the fan club here in Westover, thanks to his flamboyant style. As usual, he stopped to encourage the crowd during his entrance, and this time he was in the far lane, with even more time to get the crowd worked up. He's got the header of a showman, he does. You would think he would have started running a carnival or something, but somehow he ended up as a tournament knight, Prince Claudius muttered. You're not wrong. Perhaps it's just that the life of a carnival operator isn't dignified enough for a man with a knighthood? Who knows? He might start a theater troupe at some point, put his skills to good use in a way that suits his station. Alexis joked. Old Jack Merlot smiled. Or, we could offer his a job here as director of events at the arena. It's fit for a knight, and he clearly loves the work. The prince laughed at the old drunkard's enthusiasm. You know, he might actually take the job. He's been 20 years in the circuit, and he's doing well this week, but that won't last forever. Another 5 or 10 years, and the lingering wounds will have him out of the saddle more than he's in it. If I had to guess, he's doing ours best to build a reputation and retirement fund while he can, and then he'll step aside. If you can get him before that, you might land a real gem. Dominic considered their words carefully. They did need someone with those skills to arrange events for the arena, and the title could be elevated to that of an advisor, with pay to match. The arena manager would make that much or more if the facility was privately owned. All right, I will have one of my lovely advisors draw up a contract, and we can talk to him about it either tonight or tomorrow. What do you say we invite the final 12 for dinner tonight? That's enough for a proper gathering, and if we wait another day the mood will be spoiled. Nobody wants to attend a celebratory dinner after they've lost, Dominic suggested. Not a bad idea at all. Be sure to invite all of Prince Damien's paladins, even if they've lost. They're still his royal escort, and it would be rude to give some a lower status. Especially when they will soon be dukes, and some will have territories bordering Stantia province. Jack Merlot added, "Thank you for volunteering. Me and my big mouth. I know the drink would get me in trouble one day, but I never expected it to earn me more work." Dominic smiled at the aging soldier. "You are proof positive that once you've practiced it enough, you can master the art of anything. And it turns out that is true of speaking your mind as well." "I will take it as a compliment then." Sir Charles made his first pass down the lane, and was splintered with a pair of solid hits. There was no telling how this match was going to end, as his opponent from Shersdonia was no soft target, but Charles wasn't letting that get in the way of his show. In the third lance, he finally saw the advantage, when a hit to the chest slid across his armor, without breaking. And that was all it took. The final 2 passes saw both lances break, and Sir Charles moved on to the final day. Chapter 650. The Right Technique. Fortunately for Jack, Julio had contract application templates ready to go, and he just had to copy one out with the name and job title added. No need to think up formalities while drinking. Dominic would have to read it over and sign it anyhow, so he probably could have let one of the maids do the writing. But Jack knew that it would take a bit extra to steal a good night, and he had the experience to know how to phrase it. That was the most important part. Even if it was something that they might want, if you didn't phrase the offer correctly, a proud knight like Sir Charles would easily reject the offer and look elsewhere for the same thing. He wasn't a desperate man looking for work, or even a tradesman in need of a good place to grow his reputation. Rather than the refugees that they had grown used to dealing with, they needed someone with his skills as much or more than he needed Westover. However, Jack knew just how to appeal to a knight who had spent too long struggling to make a name for himself without ever truly distinguishing himself enough that he got a noble promotion or even enough money that he changed his lifestyle. What he needed was open recognition. So, that was how Jack phrased the closing portion of the invitation. "Sir Charles Whitberry of Signia, you are formally invited to the ducal manor for celebration of victory this evening at dusk. Attire is royal casual. 5 courses will be served, finishing with wine. P.S. If you should be interested, Duke Dominic requests to speak with you about your willingness to accept a formally recognized advisor's position as the head of entertainment within the duchy, with exact details to be negotiated." That should be enough to keep the knight intrigued through dinner. Formally recognized meant that it was a bureaucratic title that the duchy was bestowing, something more than a simple job, which would elevate his status within society. Much like Castellan Julio held power within the manor. It wasn't quite as good as becoming a baronet, but a duke's advisors were given immense respect and freedom to make decisions within their fields of specialty. Especially for a young duke without family guidance, but with royal connections. The rest of the invitations to dinner were sent out by the maids, and while they were not a mandatory event, nor did they request an RSVP to formalize the numbers, Jack didn't think that any of the final 12 knights would turn them down. Not with the King of Signia in attendance. Now all that was left to do was to wait for everyone to show up. There wasn't much time between the end of the just for the day and dusk. Only a few hours. But it was enough time for everyone to change and get ready for dinner, which they were going to do anyhow, just in less fancy clothing. It was also a short walk to the manor, and they all had mechanical horses. The only question was how long it would take them to get away from the crowds who had come to congratulate them. That was definitely going to take some time, as they had just won 2 rounds of the joust today, and that made them practically celebrities, even without considering that they were noblemen in their own right, and far wealthier than most of the locals were ever likely to be. Knighthood might be the lowest of the nobility, but it was also the most relatable to the common citizens, as they often served beside them, and not indirectly the way that they usually did with noble officers. And that made them more like a folk hero than the leadership caste. It was also the only noble rank that nearly any commoner could be elevated to. In theory, you needed some level of noble or royal blood to be granted a noble title, but the knighthoods were an exception to that, as they could be granted to commoners for military valor. Realistically, with the dubious behavior of many noblemen, you only had to go back a few generations in most families to find an ancestor who was most likely born to a noble employer. Sending the pregnant servant away with a severance package, and then sending the child to a decent school to keep them silent was pretty standard practice for noblemen who wanted to keep their reputation, or wanted to keep their indiscretion from reaching the ears of their wife. It didn't usually work, but they tried anyhow. Half an hour before the sun reached the horizon, Dave informed Dominic that there were riders coming for the manor. The knights had decided to make a spectacle of the invitation, and they were in their best outfits, with clean cloth barding on the mechanical horses and their pennants flying, to remind everyone who was in the final 12, and perhaps encourage them to purchase a few banners to show support. Every bit of merchandise helped. They had one more day of tournament here in Wizziver, then they were on to the next spot in the circuit, where that was dependent on the night. Not everyone went to every location, and some would prefer their home nation's justs over others. Though for some of the knights from smaller nations, the opposite was true. It was better to bring another nation's money home with them. The procession of knights was an impressive showing, each of them precisely 5 meters apart, just enough room for the fans of each to push forward in the few seconds before the next passed. We really do need to work on our public events department, because inviting a bunch of knights for dinner is probably the best show we've put on in months. Dominic joked. You know that's part of your job, right? Alexis asked. Is it? I was going to hire someone for that. Definitely hire someone for that. The princes laughed quietly as the pair bickered, knowing that they were not serious, but also that their own vacation time was nearly up.